Hey guys, it's Miss Kristie from the Warrensburg branch, and I'm back with another brain lab that you can make with items around your home. The book I'm using is called Brain Labs for Kids, 52 Mind-Blowing Experiments, Models, and Activities to Explore Neuroscience by Eric H. Chudler. Today we will learn about the brain in Unit 2 and complete Lab 7. This lab will take a little longer and can get messy since we will be paper macheing. For Lab 7, you will need a balloon aired up a little bigger than your head. This will be the mold for your thinking cap. Paper mache paste. There are many different ways to make the paste. I am using water and glue. The ratio will be 2 parts glue to 1 part water. If you don't have glue, you can also mix flour, salt, and water. The ratio is 1 to 1. 1 part flour and 1 part water and a few dashes of salt. Or liquid starch and water with a ratio of 2 to 1. 2 parts liquid starch and 1 part water. You will also need a mixing bowl, scissors, newspapers, and paintbrushes, along with paints. But first, let's learn about our brain. Do you know that our brain controls everything that we do? Our brain receives signals or information from our senses to know what is going on around us. Our brains must understand this information and send the appropriate response to muscles, organs, and glands. Your brain controls things you might not even realize, like your heart rate or breathing. We don't have to think about these. Our brain does it for us automatically. Your brain also controls more complex actions like reading, speaking, planning, and problem solving. Although scientists know the brain does many of these complicated functions, they are still unraveling some of the mysteries about this 3-pound mass of tissue in our heads. The labs in Unit 2 will help you understand the structure of the brain. You will build models of the brain using different materials to show the anatomy of the outside and the inside of the brain. The last lab will show you the importance of wearing a helmet. Remember that it is much easier to protect the brain than to try and fix the brain after damage. There are 4 lobes of the brain that we will focus on in Lab 7. The frontal lobe, temporal lobe, parietal lobe, and occipital lobe. The frontal lobe is involved in movement, thinking initiation, reasoning or judgment, behavior and emotions, memory and speaking. The frontal lobe is where our personality develops and where emotions come from, along with our sense of smell. The temporal lobe is known for understanding language, behavior, memory, hearing, and facial recognition. Since the temporal lobe is located near the ear, it's an easy way to help remember that it helps with sound. This lobe is the first stop sound that we hear makes. Here, pitches, frequencies, and sounds are given meaning. Selective hearing is housed in the temporal lobe. It helps filter out the unnecessary sounds so you can focus on the important ones. An example would be in class. Classmates are talking while your teacher is at the front teaching. Here, your temporal lobe makes it possible for you to block out the classmates having their own discussion and listen to the teacher's lesson for that day. Please remember to use your selective hearing for the power of good and not to ignore your parents or teachers, please. The parietal lobe is in charge of processing the sensation of touch, like pain or temperature, and limb position. It is also in control of knowing your left side from your right side, understanding spatial relationships, coordination of movement, visual perception, speech, reading, writing, and math. Lastly, the occipital lobe controls aspects of vision like color determination, facial recognition, object recognition, distance, depth perception, and movement. Our brain can also be split into 2 halves, the right and left hemispheres. What do these hemispheres do? The left hemisphere is in charge of reading, writing, speaking, reasoning, and understanding. It is also in control of controlling your right side of the body. Studies have shown that the left brain processes information sequentially, or one at a time. When in school, I was taught that the left brain is in charge of more analytical thinking, or more in-depth serious thinking, and the right side is more creative and taps into the artistic side. The right hemisphere controls visual perception, recognizing patterns, music, emotional expressions, understanding spatial relationships, or that's known as your own personal bubble space. The right brain also controls the left side of your body's motor control, or movements. It's crazy to think that the opposite side of our brain is controlling the other. Think about how fast neurons we learned about in Unit 1 are traveling to make this happen. Our right brain is also good for making inferences. The definition of an inference is a conclusion reached on the basis of evidence and reasoning. All this means is that we can group similar items together or infer what is coming next. For example, if you were to enter a building and the person greeting you smiles, when someone smiles, we assume they are happy. The person smiled when you walked in the building, so we can infer they must be happy to see you. Now that you have learned about the structure of the brain and some of its functions, let's move on to Lab 7. This lab will take a few hours over 2 days to complete. We will have to let our creations dry for the first part and then paint the second part. For the first part of Brain Lab 7, you will need to prep the area since this will get messy. I laid down old newspapers and taped down the edges so they won't move. Next, air up a balloon to the size of your head and set it aside. Mix 8 ounces of glue with 4 ounces of water and set aside. I rolled up 2 pieces of tape and put them on the balloon. Then I made sure the balloon was taped to my newspapers. That way nothing will be moving or rolling around while I paper mache. Pre-cut old newspapers into different lengths. Any size from 2 to 8 inches long and about an inch wide will work great. To begin, you will dip your paper into the paste. Wipe off the excess paste by sliding the paper in between your fingers. Gently put the paper onto the balloon and press out any air bubbles. Remember, you're making a thinking cap, so paper mache an area big enough to make your cap fit, so it will fit on your head. For part 2 of Lab 7, you will want to cut the end of your balloon so it will deflate or let out all of its air. Then gently pry apart your balloon from your thinking cap. Now is when you will want to trim any edges to make sure your thinking cap fits. Move your cap to a clean area. Here I will show you how to outline your lobes. First, I outlined where the temporal lobes are on the sides of our heads by our ears. It's okay if your lines aren't perfect. We will paint over them in part 2 of Brain Lab 7. Next, I outlined the frontal lobe. It is at the front of your brain or behind your forehead. Then I go to the back and outline the occipital lobe. That is at the back of your head, above your neck. It's at the very top of the screen. Lastly, the parietal lobe is already outlined at the top of your thinking cap. Here is where this lab can get messy again. Make sure your area is prepped with newspaper. Now it's time to paint. You will need 4 colors. I chose green, red, blue, and yellow. Grab a paintbrush and some water to clean your brushes between colors. I started with green on the frontal lobe and rinsed out my brush before moving on. With a clean brush, I went ahead and painted the parietal lobe red, temporal lobes blue, and the occipital lobe yellow. Let your thinking cap dry and it will be ready to wear. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time.